Hello guys, and welcome back to HJW Gaming and another Spender formation guide on Age of Empires Mobile. This time we're going to be taking a look at Spender formations for the Cavalry, and this time we're actually going to be taking a look for the first time away from Warriors and instead looking at Tactician formations. Hopefully you guys enjoy. Now we're going to start by taking a look at our first commander, which is going to be Hannibal. Now Hannibal is a commander available from the legendary Advent. This is great as it means that you can basically spend as much as you want to get his respect level as high as you need it. If you repeatedly spend on here, you of course do have the chance of getting either the 1 or 10 Hannibal medals, and you do also have the mercy timer along the bottom if I move out of the way, which guarantees a certain number of medals that will be rewarded depending on how many chests you open. So if you spend a lot on this, you can get him to a very high rank, and he's very easy to make available by spending just 20 spins, and therefore you get him available and you can then spend universal medals on him also. So why are we looking towards using Hannibal? Now the first thing to note with Hannibal is he's primarily a strategy commander, meaning that we're going to look within the talent tree for the first time, different to all the other commanders. We're going to instead look to increase his strategy skill. However, you will also notice he does have quite high might, almost very comparable with his strategy. And we'll talk about this a little bit later on, but he does actually deal both strategy and might damage. So whilst I haven't mentioned talent trees particularly in many of my other guides, I will recommend in this one increasing both might and strategy for him. I think this is important as it will both lead to a damage increase coming from Hannibal. The other thing about this is dealing both might and strategy damage does make him very hard to counter, as opponents will need to have both very high armour and very high strategy stats in order to resist the amount of damage that he will be dealing from both means. But let's take a dive into his skills. Now we have him as the commander, so this is his commander skill. This is Surprise Victory. Now this is interesting, as I said, it deals a pretty high amount of might damage here. I've got him currently at level 25 and it deals nearly 300% might damage, but also exactly the same in strategy damage. And it also increases your hero's might, armour and strategy by the amount the target commander's attributes are reduced by, respectively. So this will be very important later on. But the main thing we're looking here is he gets those 2 instances of damage, which is why I recommended increasing both his might and strategy within his talent tree. So these are very high amounts of damage. This is, nearly 600% damage being dealt every time his commander skill activates. Now, the kind of empowering himself for 2 turns, increasing his might and strategy being the primary thing, is important when we take a look into his signature skill, which does synergize fantastically well. Now, this is Peerless. Now this is a secondary strike skill. It means that after launching a normal attack, it deals an instance of might and strategy damage again, this time nearly 100% at my current level. So again you get those 2 instances of damage, but the main thing is it reduces the enemy commander's armour and strategy by a percentage. Now this synergizes brilliantly with that commander skill. Now why is that important? Because of course those debuffs will increase your hero's might by the same amount. So if you reduce by 22, say here, you're therefore going to get a 22 buff in total to your stats as a result of Surprise Victory, his commander skill. But the other thing is, of course, reducing their strategy also means they take more damage from that strategy damage, and reducing their armour means they take more damage from that might damage. So you kind of almost get like a snowballing effect here, where you're reducing their stats and increasing your own, meaning you get very high increased amounts of damage being dealt on top of an already high damage commander skill. So Hannibal is great at dealing huge amounts of damage through both might and strategy means. Now the important thing to note with Peerless, which we'll get into when we go into his ranks, is that originally it's for 1 turn, so 3 seconds, but once he's rank 1, this is increased up to 2 turns, so 6 seconds. However, if you push his respect ranks up even further and maximise this skill, the amount of damage and debuffs he deals are absolutely ridiculous. I believe the debuffs are 100 for both armour and for strategy. So this will then increase him by that amount as well, which is a ridiculously massive buff. Now for optional skills, Hannibal actually has a very interesting toolkit available to him. The two epic skills that he begins with, the first is Sowing Discord, which is a secondary strike skill. So after you inflict a normal attack, you have a chance to deal strategy damage to the enemy troop and also steal an amount of strategy from the enemy commander. So again, increasing your strategy stat and reducing your opponents, so they're going to take more strategy damage as a result. The second epic skill you start with is Infuriation. And this is kind of the same but slightly changed because it's the might based version, in that you deal might damage to the enemy troop and it increases your commander's might by a certain amount for one turn. So again, increasing that might damage being dealt by Hannibal. Now, both of these are okay, but of course the legendary skills are always going to be better, so we are going to look to replace them both. If you're looking to replace one or the other, I'd recommend replacing Sowing Discord first, as I think actually the increase you get on your strategy is not as good as you would get from the increased might from Infuriation, but either of these can be replaced. It's very close between the two. Now, I said he has an interesting toolkit. That's because his legendary skills, again, kind of flip between the two of might, strategy, or both. The first of these is Tactical Pursuit, which again, secondary strike skill. After launching a normal attack, it will deal might and strategy damage to the enemy troop. Unfortunately, there's no other buff or debuff that comes as a result of this. There is only that strategy and might based damage. So in my opinion, this isn't as good as some of the other ones, so maybe look away from this one. The next up is Weak Spot Attack, which is the kind of might-based damage skill available within his legendary optional skills. Again, secondary strike. Pretty much all his skills are going to be secondary strikes. He's very, very focused on the secondary strike chance and activation. So he deals might damage to the enemy troop and increases your hero's damage for one turn by a percentage. So again, very good synergy for increasing Hannibal's damage. I'm actually going to jump across to Crushing Impact as the next one. After launching a normal attack, deals strategy damage to the enemy troop and reduces the enemy commander's might by 16 in my case, or an amount basically, depends on how high up level or how many upgrades you put into the skill. But this is actually great in my opinion, as of course deals strategy damage, which synergizes well with his high strategy stat, but reduces the opponent's commander's might. Now, of course, opposing commanders primarily, as I've talked through in all my other guides, most guides that are very strong are warrior-based heroes. And of course, warrior-based heroes focus primarily around the might stat, so reducing that will decrease their damage. And you'll be able to deal good strategy damage on top of that. So this is a very strong skill in my opinion. But maybe not quite as good as Weak Spot Attack, as increasing your damage by a flat percentage is maybe a little bit more reliable just for increasing Hannibal's damage as much as possible. But the last of which I think is actually possibly the best skill available for Hannibal, and this is Double Attack. Now, on a DPS, Double Attack is a great skill, as it gives you a chance to enter the double attack state, meaning that you can deal 2 normal attacks within one turn. Of course, if you deal 2 normal attacks within one turn, that gives an additional activation chance for every single one of your secondary strike skills, of which all the rest of Hannibal's skills will be. So it gives a great chance for you to deal a massively increased amount of damage. Now at the beginning this has an 8% activation chance, but can be increased as you upgrade the levels of the skill. Along with the double attack state though, it also increases your hero's might, strategy and armour. Now this is great again, of course, as both might and strategy are very relevant for Hannibal's damage. And then you've got armour as well, meaning he takes less damage for one turn. So in my opinion, if you're going to replace any of these here, I would replace Sowing Discord with Double Attack as the first priority. Now as the spender formation, I'm going to recommend 2 skills. The second skill, when you replace Infuriation, I would replace it with Weak Spot Attack in my opinion, as not only do you deal that good amount of might damage, but that increased percentage of damage dealt will also increase the strategy damage that you're dealing from other skills. So I think Weak Spot Attack is probably the best second skill to use for him. Crushing Impact is good, so you could go with this. Tactical Pursuit is probably more mid, so if I had to rank them, I'd probably say Weak Spot Attack was the best, Crushing Impact a very close second, and then Tactical Pursuit left a little bit behind. But all of these will be better than the epic skills, so prioritise Double Attack, then look to pick up Weak Spot Attack on him. Hannibal's investment ranks are very beneficial. His first rank increases the duration of debuff effects from his signature skill by 1 turn or 3 seconds. So again, this is brilliant, as that increased time of debuff means less damage being dealt by the opposing commanders, and more increases that you get as a result of that commander skill increasing by the opposing debuff amount. His rank 3 is also brilliant, giving a solid damage buff. Increases the damage of Peerless's might and strategy damage by 70% each. So 140% damage buff for Hannibal, which is absolutely brilliant once again. And his rank 5 increases the attribute reduction effect of Peerless by 65 points. Now this 5th rank star is going to be an enormous power spike, as you'd expect, for Hannibal, as of course reducing the opponent's stats by 65 points is great in itself for reducing the amount of damage you're going to receive from their skills, but also you therefore, as I've said, get the 65 point increase to your own stats because of the commander skill Surprise Victory. So that's actually twofold, that bonus, in the fact that it massively curbs the amount of damage you're going to receive, increases the amount your opponents are going to receive, and then on top of that increases the amount of damage that you're going to deal. If you're going to spend and get him to 5 stars, he is going to be an absolute monster. So the end result, as I've said, you end up with a commander who's extremely hard to counter, as he deals both might and strategy damage, and therefore opponents will have to make sure their stats are high in both armour and strategy in order to avoid that damage. You also end up with the potential for repeat activations of very high damage secondary strike skills, along with significant debuffs to the enemy commanders as well, along with empowering himself. But the main thing to note here is also the amount of debuffs being given to the enemy commanders, as that will be a running theme throughout this formation. Now, starting with a spin wheel commander, that's a little bit too low spend, and this is a spend guide. So where are we going to go from here? We're going to take a look second with Justinian the Great. Now, Justinian the Great is a commander that's available through the Mightiest Governor event. If you place within the top 100 overall in the Mightiest Governor event, you will get medals for Justinian the Great. Of course, this does cost quite a lot, as often points within the Mightiest Governor tend to be based around speeding up a lot of things, such as building upgrades, troop conscription, or smithing at the forge. However, once you have Justinian the Great unlocked, you do see another great cavalry tactician hero who focuses again around enemy debuffs. His signature skill, Defensive Assault, provides a good troop recovery for bringing back troops that you have lost during the battle, which is increased by strategy, which of course Justinian is another strategy-based commander. But it also reduces the amount of damage that your troops take during the battle, and it triggers every 3 seconds as a result of any of your heroes activating their secondary strike skills. Now, of course, this can repeatedly activate, as Hannibal, we mentioned previously, is focusing primarily around secondary strike skills. So if his secondary strike skills, keep on activating over and over again, you're going to get activations of Defensive Assault, reducing the amount of damage that your troops take, which is a brilliant empowerment buff for your troops. With his optional skills, there's not a huge amount of synergy here, at least in the epic skills, so we're going to look to replace both of these as soon as possible. The first replacement we're going to pick up is Peaceful Haven. Now, Peaceful Haven is absolutely brilliant synergy with some of his other skills, with his signature skill, is that after the hero recovers units, reduces your troops' damage taken by a percentage for 1 turn. Now, 100% activation chance, so this is guaranteed every single time your signature skill activates. You'll further reduce the amount of troops damage that your troops take. So excellent synergy with that signature skill. As for the second skill, you can pick up pretty much any of the others, as they all synergize pretty well. Crushing Impact is great, as it will deal an amount of strategy damage, meaning that Justinian, as he doesn't have any other damage skills, will at least deal a reasonable amount of damage, and it's focused on strategy, which of course he's a strategy commander, and reduce the enemy commander's might, which is brilliant again, as you're further debuffing the enemy commanders, and I think that debuff should then synergize as well with the commander skill from Hannibal. So further debuffing them should further push up the might of Hannibal and synergize very, very well. So I think Crushing Impact is the skill that I would recommend as your second skill. However, the other two are very strong as well. Both revolve around additional instances of healing. So you have both War Tactic, which deals strategy damage to the enemy troop and recovers some of your troops' units, which is a secondary strike skill with a 25% activation chance. Or you have, probably the better of the two, Protracted Battle, which recovers your units after every 6 normal attacks your troop launches. And of course, activating that means that then you'll get more activations of Peaceful Haven, reducing the amount of damage that your troops receive. So I do think Protracted Battle synergizes pretty well with Peaceful Haven. However, I would probably use Peaceful Haven and Crushing Impact, as that debuff of Crushing Impact should synergize better with Hannibal as your main commander. However, you can't really go wrong with any of these. Now, Justinian has some interesting rank increases. His rank 1 isn't massively beneficial. It increases the unit recovery rate by 15% from your signature skill. As we're not kind of really focusing too much on the recovery, we're looking more at the damage taken buff. Instead, this is a reasonable buff, but not anything massive. However, talking about massive, that comes in at his rank 3. Defensive Assault reduces your troops' damage taken by an extra 5%. Now, of course, taking 5% less damage is a massive buff. So this is a lovely spike in his power curve. If you're looking to get him to any particular rank, I would aim for primarily rank 3, as this will massively improve his viability. His rank 5 is pretty reasonable. The duration of the damage reduction effect granted by Defensive Assault is increased by 1 second. So I believe it activates every 3 seconds, I think it is, and therefore is only applicable for 1 second. So this is almost like a 50% buff or plus 100% buff to Defensive Assault or his signature skill. So basically doubling the effectiveness of Defensive Assault. So therefore, in my opinion, that is again a huge power spike. So rank 5 again is something to aim for, but this will be very, very high spend to get him there, as you'll have to either spend a huge amount in Mightiest Governor events, or you'll have to spend a lot of universal tokens. So it'll be very difficult to get Justinian there, but if you can, and your spend is no limit for you, take Justinian to rank 5 and you'll see a huge buff in his viability. Now, the third in command that you choose to use in this formation actually depends quite on your spend level. There's one for high spend and there's one for very high spend. I'll start off with the high spend recommendation, and that's going to be Cleopatra. Now, Cleopatra has almost perfect synergy with Hannibal. If we take a look at her signature skill, Mesmerization, this is a secondary strike skill once again, and after dealing a normal attack, you can deal an amount of strategy damage to the enemy troop and increases your commander's might and strategy by an amount for 6 seconds. So for 2 turns, which is a massive buff, and this is what I mean by synergy with Hannibal, as that huge empowerment for Hannibal gives him a great amount of possible damage. It also deals reasonably decent strategy damage as well, which synergizes well with her very high base strategy. As we look into optional skills, once again both her epic skills are pretty poor. If you're going to look to keep one, I'd look to keep Sowing Discord, just because it's the only one based around damage and enemy troop debuffing. Of course, Efficient Harvest is pretty much pointless unless you're looking to use her as a gathering commander. So replacing Efficient Harvest, we have quite a few options, but the best of which I would recommend is Double Attack. Now, Double Attack, as I've mentioned earlier, is great as it puts you in the double attack state, or has a chance to, and therefore you can get more activations of your secondary strike skills. Again, I think this is important for Cleopatra, as more double attacks or more activations gives more chances for Mesmerization to activate, which is the primary reason we're using her in this formation. More activations of Mesmerization is increased might, increased strategy for Hannibal, and therefore more damage from your primary DPS. For the second legendary skill, I'd recommend once again taking Crushing Impact, again for that enemy troop debuff, which massively reduces their might. If you consider the amount of debuffs coming from Hannibal, Justinian as well, especially if you're using Crushing Impact on him as well, and now the debuffs from Cleopatra as well, your opponent's stats are going to be so low, they are going to be dealing very, very minimal amounts of damage. And Crushing Impact as well actually does deal a reasonable amount of damage as well. Strategy damage, so between this and her signature skill, Cleopatra will actually deal pretty reasonable damage herself as well, especially when she's not the primary DPS of your formation. So what do you end up with your final formation? You end up with enormous amounts of enemy debuffs. Their stats will be so low they'll be dealing next to nothing in damage. Now the important thing to note here is when you and your alliance are attacking various different targets, say you're trying to attack an opposing army, the debuffs that you inflict here will also be carried over within your friendlies' battles as well. So by you playing this formation, you're actually massively increasing and benefiting your alliance's formations as well. So all of your alliance will be thankful to you for playing this formation, as it does help them massively. On top of that, the amount of troop debuffs you get and DPS from Hannibal does actually make this a very stand-up formation in its own right. But I said I was going to move on to a replacement for Cleopatra in that third slot that is for the very, very high spend players. And that commander is Ashoka, who unfortunately I don't currently have unlocked. Now the reason I say Ashoka is only for the very high spend is as the only way to unlock him currently is through the Mightiest Governor event once again. However, you have to place within the top 10 to get his unlock medals. So this will require an enormous amount of spend and speed ups in order to get into that top 10. Of course, if you do get very high up, you can get an enormous number of these medals. However, it's going to require a lot of spend in order to unlock him, which is why I currently don't have him. But why do we look to use Ashoka as the third in command instead of Cleopatra if she has such great synergy with Hannibal already? Now the reason is primarily his signature skill. Similar to someone like Tribuana, who does similar for warrior swordsman, Ashoka gives a great buff to signature secondary strike activation chance. Now this is only at the beginning with level 1 with no upgrades, is 1%. Of course this does increase as you increase the level of his skill. But this is great as it gives you an increased chance of Hannibal therefore activating his secondary strike signature skill, and therefore getting that massive surge of might and strategy damage, as well as that empowerment of himself by increasing his might and strategy by the amount the opponent is debuffed. On top of that, if your commander, so in this case Hannibal, activates his signature skill, you do also gain a 15% chance to activate the control immunity state, and this will make him immune from control, burn or rout effects. Now we don't see a lot of these being used in the current meta, but the main thing will be rout effects, which can deal a fairly large amount of might damage. If you think about free-to-play warrior formations revolving around King Derek, they do revolve around the rout state. So if you can become immune to that, you could again reduce the amount of damage that you're going to receive from formations that use this synergy. But the main thing here is that increased chance of activating secondary strike skills. Now into legendary skills, he also has an amazingly synergistic legendary skill, and that is Roar of Victory. This will be the first skill I'd recommend picking up, and this is a secondary strike skill with a 20% activation chance, but after launching a normal attack it deals might damage to the enemy troop, but this isn't the main reason we're looking to use it. The main thing, although the might damage is actually pretty decent, but increases your troops' rage by an amount as well. Now for those who aren't aware, rage is how often your commander can activate his main commander skill. So increasing the amount of rage every single turn through activations of Roar of Victory will be incredibly useful. More activations of his commander skill, again more damage and more empowerment of your commander. And for the second legendary skill we'll pick up Weak Spot Attack, as again this is brilliant as it deals a pretty reasonable amount of might damage, but the main thing is we're looking to increase all of your heroes' damage by a percentage for one turn. So again this synergizes very well with Hannibal as it will increase that damage. It means that when you hit those damage bursts with Hannibal, which will come more often as a result of Roar of Victory, you will get more damage again as a result of that buff. So yeah, the synergies, similar to Cleopatra having good synergies, you do get incredible synergy from using Ashoka with Hannibal. As for rank buffs with Ashoka, being such a kind of pay-to-win hero, you'd expect them to be pretty impressive, and they definitely are. His rank 1 in particular being very powerful, it increases the damage of your commander's secondary strike skills by another 20%. So whereas he increases the activation chance already, the fact it also can increase the damage of those secondary strike skills as well, of which Hannibal has many, this will be a very big buff again to Hannibal's damage. The rank 3 in my opinion isn't too massive of a buff, as increases the trigger chance of the control immunity effect. As I said, this doesn't affect too much, I don't think. I don't think this is a massive buff, so if anything this can be skipped over. I wouldn't go from rank 1 unless you're willing to go all the way up to rank 5 on Ashoka. However, the rank 5 is another big buff, increases the activation chance of your commander's signature secondary strike skill by a further 2% on top of whatever buff you get from the level you have it at that point. So this is another big buff, again increasing that activation chance for Hannibal and that massive damage increase possibility. And with that, that's again everything that I have to discuss on this Spender Cavalry formation for early game. If you guys have enjoyed, please smash the like button. If you have any questions, drop them in the comment section below. And I really hope to see you on the next one.